Being a servant in a castle would have been an absolute nightmare. Here are 5 reasons why. Endless cleaning. Servants would have been expected to clean the castle from top to bottom on a daily basis. This would include sweeping, mopping, dusting, and polishing all of the furniture and ornaments. In addition to this, they would also be responsible for cleaning the toilets and attending to the more, shall we say, unpleasant tasks. To make matters worse, they would be expected to do all of this with the castle in near constant disarray. Between hosting parties, having children running around and playing, and royalty just generally making a mess, servants would have had very little time to actually relax or take a break, and when they did, it wouldn't even be peaceful because, no, 2 freezing nights. Castles were often drafty and cold, especially during the winter months. Servants would have been forced to wear heavy coats and blankets just to stay warm. Even then, they would still be shivering while they worked. Servants' sleeping quarters were usually located in the castle's basement or attic, which were the coldest parts of the building. To make matters worse, they would often have to share these cramped spaces with other servants, sometimes as many as 10 people to a room. There was also the risk of fire, which could easily spread through the wooden structures and trap servants inside with nowhere to escape. No privacy. Servants in a castle had absolutely no privacy. They would be at the beck and call of the royals at all times, and were expected to drop whatever they were doing and go to their Royal Highness's aid immediately. They would have to share their living spaces with their employers, and their rooms would often be located directly next to the royals, meaning that they would be woken up in the middle of the night if the king or queen needed something. To add insult to injury, servants were often forced to listen to the royals having sex. If they were unlucky enough to have their chambers next to the royal bedroom, there would be absolutely no escaping the sounds of passion or whatever else the royals were getting up to. Number 4. Back-breaking labor. Servants were expected to perform a wide variety of tasks, both inside and outside of the castle. They might be asked to do everything from cooking and cleaning to gardening and livestock herding. Many servants were also tasked with helping the royals get ready for bed. This would include things like washing their clothes, preparing their food, and even brushing their hair. It was backbreaking work that required long hours of labor, but servants were not allowed to complain or they would be punished. The workload was simply too much for any one person to handle, but they had no choice but to do it all. And finally, number 5, the punishments. If a servant made a mistake, they could expect some form of punishment. This could be anything from being scolded to being locked up in a tower. More severe punishments included being thrown in jail or having their wages docked. In extreme cases, servants could even be put to death. For example, in 1588, a Scottish servant girl named Agnes Sampson was burned at the stake for the crime of stealing a tablecloth. Castles may seem like romantic places straight out of a fairy tale, but for those who worked there, they were more like a prison than a home. Servants were treated like disposable commodities, working tirelessly to keep the wheels of the castle turning smoothly. They faced harsh conditions, endless chores, lack of privacy, and severe punishments if they made any mistakes. All in all, life as a servant in a castle was definitely not for the faint of heart. Warfare in the Middle Ages is often painted in broad strokes. We think about knights in shining armor clashing on open fields or catapults hurling boulders over castle walls. But what if there's more to these stories than meets the eye? Hi, everyone. Hi there, number 10. Today we're going to talk about the siege of Chateau Galliard, one of the most brutal sieges in history. Let's get into it. In 1202, King Philip II of France set his sights on the English-held fortress of Chateau Galliard, which was situated just north of Paris. Built by the English after they seized it in 1194, the fortress had become an irritant to the French crown. Meanwhile, King John of England was absent from the kingdom he ruled over, fighting his own war in Ireland. And so the fortress was defended by a man named Hugh de Lusignan, brother of the King of Cyprus. While his military experience was lacking, Hugh was more than happy to fill the role of a figurehead. In truth, it was his wife, Isabella, who ran the day-to-day operations of the fortress. She was a strong-willed woman whose sharp intellect and cunning had turned her into a force to be reckoned with. As Philip marched on the fortress with a sizable army, Hugh confidently predicted that no army could hope to capture the well-built fortress, especially not while he was inside it. He sent messengers to inform the English king of Philip's approach, but those messages never made it through. As the French army arrived at the fortress, they began their campaign with a massive artillery bombardment. They unleashed a hail of arrows and stones upon the fortress, attempting to breach its thick stone walls. But the Chateau Galliard's construction had been done well and the attacks did little damage, while the defenders were able to repulse the attackers time and again. It quickly became apparent to Philip that a prolonged siege was in order, and so he established a camp near the fortress and settled in for the long haul. Philip's siege works consisted of 3 large artillery towers, 2 of which were armed with giant trebuchets capable of hurtling 600-pound missiles and a 3rd tower equipped with 8 powerful catapults. These catapults hurled smaller projectiles, but they were more accurate than the larger machines and could fire upon specific areas of the fortress wall to protect his men from the returning arrows of the defenders. Philip ordered a deep and wide ditch to be dug all around the fortress, creating a protective barrier known as a fossa. This prevented the defenders from being able to attack the besiegers and forced them to endure the constant rain of arrows. The English defenders, meanwhile, built towers of their own. They constructed 4 structures which rose 30 feet above the top of the fortress walls, allowing archers on the ramparts to fire down on the besiegers. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and despite the French king's confidence in victory, his men grew tired of the siege. Their frustration mounted as they watched the seemingly impenetrable fortress stand defiantly against their attacks. The residents of the surrounding area suffered too, as the countryside was quickly stripped bare of its resources. Philip attempted to alleviate this problem by bringing in supplies from Paris, but even then, rumors swirled that his men were reduced to eating nothing but stale bread and were forced to kill and eat their horses. By August, the situation had become so dire that the French king summoned his men to a meeting and delivered a rousing speech, urging them to redouble their efforts. The next day, the French launched another massive attack on the fortress, but to their dismay, they were once again repelled. Philip decided that something had to change. His initial plan called for him to starve out the English garrison, but it was clear that this would take far longer than he anticipated, and with winter fast approaching, he knew he didn't have much time left to capture the fortress. Before his men became too demoralized to fight, he needed a new strategy. He began ordering his men to build more siege towers, some of which reached heights of up to 82 feet. These towers allowed his men to scale the fortress walls, and Philip hoped that with enough of them, he would finally be able to break in. But first, he had to get past the moat. The solution came when he discovered the ruins of an old Roman wall that passed close by the fortress. It wasn't quite long enough to reach the structure, but Philip's engineers sawed it in half and moved it to where it was needed. When they were done, Philip had his men roll barrels filled with resin and flaxseed oil underneath the gate in the center of the wall. Then they set fire to the barrels and watched as the flames quickly spread to the dry wood of the gate. With the entrance to the fortress ablaze, Philip led a charge through the now broken gate and into the fortress courtyard. The English garrison put up a valiant fight, but they were soon overwhelmed. Philip had captured the fortress, but his victory was short-lived. As he entered the town, he found it deserted. The English defenders had fled, abandoning the fortress and the town in the process. Realizing that the inhabitants had fled into the nearby forest, he ordered his men to set the town ablaze. As the people huddled in the forest watching their homes burn, Philip's men hunted them down like animals and killed them. The few survivors were taken back to the fortress and imprisoned. Those who still had money or valuables on them were forced to turn it over before they were thrown into the dungeon. Then Philip ordered the gates of the fortress to be opened, and the prisoners were given the choice to leave, this time without their valuables. Some accepted, but many refused. They had nowhere else to go, and besides, the fortress was in ruins and offered them better protection than anything else. It was then that Philip decided to make an example of them. He had the remaining prisoners burned alive inside the fortress. Sometime later, Philip returned to the fortress to see how his men were handling the occupation of the town. He found that they weren't doing well at all. There was no food and hardly anyone to be seen. Desperate, he sent riders to the neighboring towns to bring in provisions. But when they returned with supplies, his men stole it right out from under their noses. Philip was furious and immediately ordered the ringleaders to be put to death. The rest of his men were rounded up and told that unless they cooperated and helped rebuild the town, they would face the same fate. Many of them fled into the forest, while those who stayed behind did little more than build houses. They had no interest in living in a place where everyone distrusted each other. Philip needed someone to oversee the rebuilding of the town, and he chose Hugh de Lusignan's widow, Isabella, for the job. Isabella may have been intelligent and cunning, but she was also ambitious. When Philip returned to Chateau Galliard, he was surprised to find that the town had been rebuilt. Too nicely, he also noticed that Isabella had been busy. Her chambers were furnished better than any noble's home he'd ever seen. She'd apparently been selling supplies brought into the fortress by the locals and pocketing the money. She'd used it to furnish her home and outfit herself in fine clothes. When Philip confronted her about it, castles were often built with secret passages for the use of the royals living within them. They used these secret tunnels and staircases to escape from danger or simply to move around the castle without being seen. Here are 8 hidden passages in castles that will blow your mind. No. 8. The Whispering Gallery at Windsor Castle. The walls of the royal apartments above the 19th century Waterloo Chamber at Windsor Castle are covered with red leather, which makes it possible for people to whisper secrets in one corner of the room that can be heard clearly in another. It's so exciting to think that the royals may have used this gallery to pass messages about plotting and scheming. During Queen Victoria's reign, when the castle was a hive of activity and intrigue, the gallery is open to visitors today, and you can experience this whispering phenomenon for yourself. Number 7. The Secret Staircase at Edinburgh Castle. Did you know there is a secret staircase at Edinburgh Castle that the public aren't allowed to see? This mysterious staircase is said to have been used by Mary, Queen of Scots, to escape from her enemies. It is located within the castle's famous prison, which is known as Black Douglas Hall. The prison held many famous prisoners, including the 16th century aristocrat, the Earl of Bothwell, who was imprisoned here following his involvement in the murder of Mary, Queen of Scots' husband, Lord Darnley. He remained a prisoner in Edinburgh Castle for 6 years before his death in 1578. Another famous prisoner was the 18th century Jacobite leader, Bonnie Prince Charlie, who was imprisoned in Edinburgh Castle after his defeat at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. He spent only 8 months in captivity before escaping to France. Today, tourists can explore the prison and see the cells where these famous prisoners were held. But the secret staircase remains out of bounds to the public. No. 6. A secret passageway at Carnarvon Castle. This passageway was built into the outer wall of the castle. It allowed the garrison to move around the top of the town wall unseen by the enemy. It has been described as a military relic of major importance. Researchers say it might also have been used to smuggle people or supplies in and out of the castle. This discovery was made in 2014 by a team of archaeologists from the University of Leicester during an excavation project at the castle. The team also found a number of other interesting artifacts, including a medieval latrine, a well, and the remains of a wooden water pipe. Number 5. Escape tunnel at Beauregard, Kentucky. In 1861, a Confederate soldier named John Mosby dug a tunnel over 300 feet under the Union lines at Fort Donelson in Kentucky. His mission was to allow the Confederates to escape from the fort when it became clear that they were about to be overwhelmed. The plan was for Mosby to dig a hole under the Union trenches and then fill it with barrels of water. This would allow the soldiers to slip through undetected. Unfortunately for Mosby, his tunnel collapsed just days before he was due to lead his men out of the fort. He and his men were forced to surrender along with the rest of the Confederate forces. Today, visitors to Fort Donelson can explore the tunnel that Mosby was digging. No. 4. Secret passageway at Panay Castle. At Panay Castle in Ireland, a secret passageway was recently discovered under a bathroom floor. The passageway leads from the bedroom of the caretaker to a room in the tower. It's unclear what the purpose of the passageway was, but it's believed that it may have been used for smuggling or possibly even as a means of escape. The castle was built in the 13th century and was originally the seat of the Butler family, one of the most powerful families in Ireland. Over the centuries, the castle changed hands many times and was eventually taken into state care. It's now open to the public as a museum, and visitors can explore the secret passageway for themselves. Number 3. Secret stairs at Malahide Castle. Malahide Castle in Ireland is home to a secret set of stairs that have been hiding in plain sight for centuries. The stairs were discovered in 2018 during renovations to the castle. They were covered by a false ceiling in the servants' hall, leading many to believe that they had always been there. However, this was not the case. The stairs are believed to have been used by servants and other castle employees to move around the castle without being seen by the nobility. Malahide Castle was built in the 12th century and is one of the best preserved castles in Ireland. It's now open to the public as a tourist attraction, and visitors can explore the secret stairs for themselves. No. 2. Hidden doorway at Dublin Castle. A hidden doorway at Dublin Castle may have once been used by secret agents or smugglers. The doorway was discovered in 2016 during renovations to the castle. It was covered by a false wall in the undercroft of the castle's oldest tower. The doorway is believed to have been used in the 18th. The Great Hall at Hogwarts is not just for eating meals. It's also the place where important announcements are made, and one can really get a sense of how the school year is going by what's served up at these banquets. Hi, I'm here to talk about banquets in the Harry Potter universe. So let's get into it. The very first banquet we see in the series is in the first book, and this is the Welcome Feast. This is when the students have just arrived and been sorted, and it has a chance for them to meet the other students and teachers and get acquainted with the school. So this feast is basically like a meet and greet. And there's a lot of emphasis on the food. It says here that the tables groaned under the weight of the food. We have mountains of meat pies, platters of chicken, jugs of beer. It's a really lavish spread. And this sets the tone for all of the feasts that we're going to see throughout the books, because Hogwarts feasts are always plentiful. There's always enough food for everyone and more. In fact, if you remember in the second book, Ron says, you can have a second helping if you have room. And then Hermione says, I've got plenty of room. And then she takes 7 helpings. So it's really clear that you're supposed to take as much as you want. There are no limits. If you want to take 7 helpings, you can do it. This abundance does have a magical element to it, because remember that we have a house elf called Dobby who sneaks in and steals Ron's pudding cup. And this is interesting because he's not allowed to be there. But because there's so much food, no one really notices. And this is an important detail because it shows that the elves are allowed to take food if they are discreet about it. And it also kind of tells us that there is an awareness that the elves are stealing food because they need to eat as well. They're just not allowed to be in the hall while the students are eating. Okay, another type of banquet that we see is the Christmas banquet. And this is a time where the school year is sort of halfway over. And we can see that there is a change in the atmosphere in the Great Hall because it has become very wintry. Remember that the ceiling is a moving ceiling and it changes with the seasons. And now we have lots of holly and mistletoe, and the table is decked out with lots of Christmas greenery. There's a big tree in the middle of the hall and presents underneath it, and this is a time for celebration. In fact, there's even a Yule ball after dinner, so this is a really festive occasion, and it's also a time for giving. Hagrid gives a big cat to the school, which becomes a sort of Christmas tree, and there's an ungiving of presents. Students are allowed to take presents from under the tree, and they re-encouraged to take whatever they can carry. Okay, so those are the two banquets that we see in the first two books. But in the third book, we see a different type of banquet, which is a sort of victory banquet. It happens at the end of the school year, and it is a celebration of the Triwizard tournament, and Cedric Diggory has just died, and there is a real somberness to this hall. It's described as gloomy and there's a lack of decorations. And this is important because it reflects the mood of the school. No one really wants to celebrate anything, and this is also the first time that we see a lack of food. The previous feasts had abundant amounts of food, but here we're told that the food isn't good and there's not much of it. And this is important because it foreshadows what's going to happen next. In the fourth book, Hogwarts is not going to be a safe place, and there won't be a lot of food. And this general air of depression and doom will continue until the end of the sixth book. So I hope that you enjoyed this look at banquets at Hogwarts. I know that I enjoyed talking about them. They're so fun. If you like what I do, please consider supporting me, and I will see you next time. Bye.